The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. In verse, Mujini Bodhisattva asked, "World-honored one, possessor of all grace, what reason is there for the Buddha's son, the Buddha's child, great Kanzeon, to thus be so addressed?" The honored one made answer too in verse, "Just listen to the life of Kanzeon. To calls from every quarter he responds. Of oceanic depth his holy vows. A myriad Buddhas has he truly served for ages past beyond the thought of man, and made foray great vows of purity. When people hear his name and see his form, and think of him or her, not vainly in their hearts, all forms of ill in all the world shall cease. If wishing harm an enemy should try to push another in a fiery pit, the victim should on Kanzeon's great power think, and straightway that fiery pit shall be transformed into a cool and silver lake. If drifting in the vast great ocean's foam, a person should be in danger of his life from monstrous fish or evil beings, let him only think on Kanzeon's great power. At once the sea will all compassion be." Thus begins the scripture of Avalokiteshwara Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, regarder of the cries of the world. The scripture found in chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, the Sutra of the Lotus of the Wonderful or Perfect Law. As most of you know, one of the most revered of all the Mahayana Buddhist scriptures. His Sanskrit name translates as the Lord who looks down in empathy or with compassion. As you know, Kanzeon or Kannon Bosatsu is his or her Japanese name, Chinese Guanxian, and in Korean, as we have a Korean person present, she's called Kwanseum or Kwanum. To Chinese Buddhists, her home or Bodhi Mandala is on Putoshan, her sacred mountain on an island in Zhejiang province. And one translation of this chapter's title is "The Universal Gateway of the Bodhisattva, Perceiver of the World's Sounds." Or, as we translate it, "Regarder of the Cries of the World." In the Pure Land Buddhist tradition, Avalokiteshvara is seen to be an emanation of Amitabha Buddha's great compassion and aids him in guiding beings of that practice to the Western paradise. This Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, is the first great one we encounter on the path of training in our serene reflection Buddhist tradition. She has trained herself to turn her faculty of hearing inward, letting go of all pulls to the sounds of wanting satisfaction from external things. Preferences, opinions, recognition, views, judgments, attractions, aversions, confusions. She has broken through to the field of great compassion, Mahakaruna, where all thoughts, things, beings are embraced without discrimination, without judgment, with complete acceptance just as they are. In the Shurangama Sutra, where she describes her awakening, she says, "Then the ultimate stillness was revealed." This teaching shows the importance to me of doing our meditation practice. physically bringing our minds to the present, gently, over and over, not grasping after thoughts and feelings, and not pushing them away, our senses naturally turned inward. And we loosen our grip, or this habit of clinging that we have, to what we believe our self and reality to be. The boundaries we've created over the years, and perhaps lives, for survival in the world, or to protect the self, to please the world, to perhaps not lose that pure love we knew in our hearts as young children. These gradually dissolve. Our senses are still functioning during meditation. We don't cut ourselves off from people and our environment. We still see, hear, smell, taste, feel, think. However, we let go of deliberately engaging them and with the objects of those senses that may appear in the mind. Our effort is that of sitting still in the midst of conditions, any condition, whether it's pleasant, agitated, bored, excited, confused, distressed, anxious, joyful, sleepy, feeling ill, or nothing in particular. And I'm sure you can add your own states to that. Here we begin to enter into the heart of Kanzeon, being with, underlined with, every aspect of ourselves, being present for our karmic inclinations and their cries, not turning away and not trying to fix them into what we think they should be, much as a mother or a father would embrace her child. This is the turning of the stream of compassion within, which is the ground of all Buddhist training, and also of opening up to the four wisdoms, the birth of wisdom. As we do this practice, a deeper, bigger reality gradually opens. As the translation says, the universal gateway of compassion. At first, almost imperceptibly, going beyond the opposites that our little minds have created, understandably, in an attempt to make sense of things. This new reality is not of our personal fabrication. It's a third position where great compassion appears and is able to help and heal, where we begin to cleanse the hurts and pain and foolishness of our harmful karmic habits. The willingness to just sit in this manner is itself manifesting the heart of Kanzeon. When I first came to Shasta Abbey in 1973, the lay trainees at that time spent their first week here in silence and sat some extra periods of meditation in the Kanzeon shrine each day. I was taught that this was to help us more readily quiet the mind and adapt to being in the monastery. It was hard, it was very hard, and this was my first meeting with Kanzeon. And although I was very new to Buddhist practice, her peace came into my life then unmistakably, pointing me to what I began to experience as my true home, showing me with deep kindness how I had been looking in the wrong places for peace and satisfaction, and beginning to divert the course of my karma. This has always been a source of eternal gratitude for me, and I'm always feel very close to Kanzeon as a result. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva in the Shurangama Sutra continues to say in her description of her enlightenment, First, my mind ascended to unite with the fundamental, wondrous, enlightened mind of all Buddhas in all 10 directions. And my power of compassion became the same as theirs. Second, my mind descended to unite with all beings of the 6 destinies, the 6 worlds, in all 10 directions, such that I felt their sorrows and their prayerful yearnings as my own. I was then able to go to all lands and appear in 32 forms that respond to what beings require or need. By using both body and mind, I can cause all beings to develop such perfect merit that they will have nothing to fear in any dangerous situation. And she goes on to describe how she was able to assume many different and wondrous forms with numberless heads, any number of heads and arms and hands and eyes. My hands may have 2 eyes, 1,000, 10,000 and more, even as many as 84,000, which means countless in Buddhism. Pure and magnificent eyes. In these forms, by displaying kindness, by inspiring awe, and by manifesting samadhi, meditation, and wisdom, I can rescue and shelter beings, allowing them to attain great mastery and ease. Thus the Bodhisattva of great compassion, upon hearing all the cries of the world, has vowed and continues to vow to rescue beings from suffering in any form that will help them, if they but look up in faith to the 3rd position, calling on her. There's no place or no situation that her limitless compassion cannot reach in an instant. She hears and responds at the same time. Thus she is called regarder of the cries, or she who heeds the cries of the world. There are many seemingly miraculous occurrences described in the scripture of Avalokiteshwara Bodhisattva, and the point of this is not to wish for miracles, but to encourage faith, encourage sitting still and all acceptance, and always to keep an open mind. Not long ago I heard a talk by the Dalai Lama in which he was talking with some scientists about miracles. And he made the interesting point that many of the things that we take for granted these days and think of as quite normal would have been considered miraculous, actually, centuries ago or even decades ago. When you think of airplanes flying through the sky, people flying into space, just even on that level. 100 years ago, would people have believed that? I always like to keep that in mind. It was an interesting perspective because we just don't know what's possible. As the scripture says, the scripture of Avalokiteshvara, when we find ourselves pushed into the fiery pit of the passions, such as anger or jealousy, for example, if we don't completely believe what these emotions are telling us, if we sit still with the suffering, trust that they too are impermanent, this too shall pass. We see their insubstantiality. We begin to see through them to the true self. We're calling on Kanzeon, something bigger, something beyond the opposites. And that fiery pit melts into the cool and healing lake of the waters of great compassion. We may have to do this over and over in our lives until a particular passion is purified and let go of. In my experience, we usually have to get quite desperate and fed up enough with the pain of it to begin to look up and trust There's something more, something bigger, another way. However, having experienced it just once, even just a little, and everybody has that little bit, that little ray of light come into their lives. If we just start paying attention to that when it's there, we know what's possible, and our perception will never be the same again. Now, of the 4 elements, I found this an interesting teaching. It is said that Kanzeon is particularly connected with water. As we turn the stream of compassion within through our meditation practice, we open to the Bodhisattva's Dharma door and allow the waters of compassion to circulate throughout body and mind. Whether we always feel them or not, doesn't matter. Gradually dissolving the pain, that convincing but unreal sense of separateness from that which is greater, and thus dissolving the pain of isolation from the heart of other beings as well. As John Blofeld says in his book on Kuan Yin, compassion is the prime means of destroying all clinging to delusory selfhood. It's what dissolves the glue. As we realize that there's nothing to cling to in reality, and nothing to hanker after, and that we don't have to, and as we convert the habit of trying to do so, we find ourselves and others gradually held in this great loving acceptance. No one is left out of this picture, in my experience. Although there's a lot more to see here, of course. Only the tip of the iceberg for me. All differences, good, bad, young, old, male, female, rich, poor, the just and the unjust, are all equally embraced. The differences are there, but they don't stand against each other. They're not a problem. There's absolutely no discrimination in this. As our meditation practice deepens, like Kanzeon's, we identify ever more with all beings and are able to hear, to see, and to do what really needs to be done. Quite naturally, what really helps and works in our daily lives. While compassion is healing for everyone, it may be applied differently for each person and situation. Thus, there are innumerable forms of Avalokiteshvara, sometimes male, sometimes female, or as in Japan, often with characteristics of both sexes, something beyond both. Sometimes standing, holding the lotus flower of awakening, or a willow twig or vase, sprinkling the waters of compassion upon the suffering, or a rosary representing the circulation of the water of the Spirit. She's often seated in meditation posture, tenderly surveying the sea of samsara, or in the royal ease pose, showing us how to ease our worries and relax with dignity. Sometimes white-robed or golden-robed, sometimes with a child in her arms, sometimes accompanied by her boy and girl attendants, and sometimes with her little son, Maitreya, following behind her, for great compassion is the mother of all Buddhas. Sometimes she's riding a dragon, the dragon of faith in the Dharma. Without the practice of compassion, wisdom cannot appear. As mentioned before, she may appear with innumerable heads, each with a different expression, some friendly, some fierce, whatever will be helpful in a particular situation, whatever helps us to open to that compassion within ourselves. She's able to see in all directions. His hands to help in every way possible, some holding religious articles, some perhaps garden tools, surgical implements, cooking utensils. No doubt some might be holding chainsaws and computers as well. And eyes in each of her hands with which she penetrates to the essential matter, the source of all helpfulness. The peacock is a symbol in Buddhism of this bodhisattva. Its fan of feathers with its brilliant eyes representing the 1,000 hands and eyes. Thus, as Zen Buddhist trainees, we work foremost at our meditation, letting go of clinging to the false self and to cultivating a compassionate willingness to hear and see what is needed, to doing whatever is asked of us in our daily lives. Like the arms of Kanzeon, sometimes sitting in meditation, sometimes bowing, answering emails, cleaning the toilet, caring for old mom or dad, cooking the food, balancing the books, bathing the children, feeding the homeless, taking one's medicine, washing the dishes. Each of us practicing together in the monastery this week is as one of the arms of Kanzeon. Contemplating her form is a helpful means to understanding, to me, how a religious community can and should function. It's worth noting that the 1,000-armed Kanzeon always has 2 hands in the meditation mudra and another 2 hands in Gasho. As we open to great compassion in our training, we see her helping us in unexpected ways. We begin to appreciate not only the successes in our lives, but also the difficulties we encounter. It's said that the kindest Kanzeon can be found in hell. And certainly this is my experience in breaking through to great compassion. It's often come at the most painful times, when reaping the karma of some foolish act or mistake in training, or when grieving over a serious loss. It's important to not expect Kanzeon to always appear in a gentle or benign form. Sometimes a serious illness or deep humiliation can be Kanzeon appearing to nudge us into greater understanding of the truth. So there's always an element of bowing, and it's this bowing and the acceptance that comes with it that helps us go through this particular Dharma door. I know at a time when I was having a great deal of difficulty in my training, living up in Vancouver, BC. Actually, I was basically doing fine, but in some considerable inner turmoil. And I was very much helped by seeing the Kanzeon statues in the shops that I would pass by. Of course, I realize now that I had to make the effort to look at them. So there always has to be that effort on our part. But they always helped me to be still. And the interesting thing at that time, each one that I saw always looked like Reverend Master Jiyu to me. I saw her face, and there she was, both comforting, encouraging, and a little disturbing, too. It was a clue. And I eventually got the message to pay more attention to what she'd been teaching me. And as I did that, my mind began to turn around. I felt literally I was being pulled out of a deep pit that I had fallen into. Later I realized that it was the hook of Kanzeon pulling me out. Sometimes we see images of Kanzeon with a fish basket, and she's plucking beings who are floundering about in the sea of samsara and rescuing them, putting them in her basket. So sometimes we're like that, floundering fish. The kesa clip on a monk's precepts robe is the hook, represents the hook of Kanzeon. Our willingness to look up, even for an instant, is the clip that allows Kanzeon to extract us from the mire of ignorance. All it takes is one little glance upward. Thus we come to understand how vital the Buddha's teaching in the Scripture of Great Wisdom is, that Kanzeon was, is, and will be able to see that the skandhas 5, that which makes up our existence as we know it, were as they are in their self-nature, void, unstained, and pure. When he was one with deepest wisdom of the heart that is beyond discriminative thought. When we turn our gaze inward, we can see and hear with the eyes of great compassion. Then we realize that there is indeed no mountain barrier and no river separation, as great Master Hongzhi taught. The life of all sentient beings is our own life, and our life theirs. And I'll end with a little quote of this beautiful invocation that Reverend Master Koten wrote on Kanzeon. You weep in all the sorrows of the world, rejoice in all its joys. In life you're present in all suffering, and cry in all the cries. In every being's secret, silent heart you have your dwelling place, and you cannot be moved or grasped or fixed by mind in any space. You are compassion's source, the going out. You are the coming in. No thing escapes you or impedes your work. You are the wondrous truth. To you we turn. You are the way, the goal, the journey and its end. Regarder of the cries, O guide our hearts to peace, our reaching home. Homage to all the Buddhas in all worlds. Homage to all the Bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the Scripture of Great Wisdom.